Welcome to the Gun Owners News Hour with your host and Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt.
Welcome to the Gun Owners News Hour. Today, I have a real honor to present to you Judge Roy Moore, a candidate for the U.S. Senate in the state of Alabama, and he has been taking the establishment by storm. They're not too happy about it, you might imagine. Mitch McConnell is probably among those who are quite saddened to see how this campaign has been going. But it's been going the judge's way. And Judge, we're delighted to have you here because we think you're going to make a difference for a lot of issues, including the Second Amendment.
Well, thank you, Larry, and I hope to, because I'm strict adherence to the Constitution. I find that there's an establishment, if you will, that's pouring a lot of money into this race. Oh. And, you know, the problem with that is, Larry, they think they can buy the people of Alabama, and they can't. The people of Alabama know me. They know me well. And even the president's endorsement didn't help.
You know, I think what you're saying came out pretty clearly in the first primary. Just for everybody who's listening to understand, Alabama has a system where you got to get 50%, and if there's a bunch of candidates in the first primary and nobody gets 50%, then you have a runoff. And that's what we're talking about right now is the September 26th runoff election. And you kind of surprised them a bit because you had pretty near 40% of the vote, and that wasn't what they were expecting.
No, they put actually about $8 million in the first go-round here, and they've got committed probably 8 more to the runoff. They've just spent 5 or 6 more, and they're still not making a difference. And that's because people are starting to wake up across this country. And this is a very important election because it's a prelude to the 2018 Senate races across the country. If we allow the establishment, when I say the establishment, that's not just established Republicans, the established Democrats, but we happen to be dealing in a Republican primary. If we let them have their way, they won't change. They won't change this country.
That is correct.
That's what the people voted for in November of 2016. And we've got to change, or we're going to fail. We've already seen good results coming across in the economy. We've seen a movement because that's what people wanted. But we see a stagnant Congress that just won't move. Stagnant Senate, actually.
And to give you some fodder for that statement, some support for it, our interest at Gun Owners of America, obviously, is the Second Amendment issue before anything else. And the issue is such that a lot of different subjects affect it, including Obamacare. We warned years ago that if this were not at least modified, if not defeated, then the government was going to be free to gather all kinds of information on American citizens and basically build up a list of, and what they're doing now is psychiatric diagnoses, have nothing to do with violent behavior, but they're being used to keep veterans and older people on Social Security from having guns. And there's some 250,000 people already that have been zapped. We warned them, and the Senate, there were a handful of senators that tried to stop this thing. There just weren't quite enough. And right there is reason 1 through 10 that Gun Owners of America wants to see you come to Washington.
Well, thank you, Larry. And I would say on behalf of your organization, I value it very much. I appreciate your endorsement. The larger organizations that have traditionally carried this battle are just not doing a good job at it. They invest in incumbents. Incumbents don't change, and they think they're doing something good where they're not. They're letting our rights be eroded. I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. Heller versus Washington, D.C. was a case out of Washington, D.C., where guns were restricted in private homes to have your trigger guard in one area and the rest of the gun in another. And it was ridiculous. And
Mr. Home Invader, can you spot me 5 minutes while I get my gun ready?
Get your gun together and find your ammunition and load it and have it, in the dark.
And while I'm nervous.
Yeah, and while I'm nervous. And what's wrong with that is the United States Congress is in charge of the D.C. laws. Under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, that they have exclusive jurisdiction over the gun laws and over not just gun laws, but over the regulations, over the laws of the D.C., because they're not a state. That's contained in the Constitution. Now, if your legislators and your senators and your representatives are not valuing that, why does anybody endorse them with the right to keep and bear arms? When this recent event happened in Alexandria, the
where Congressman Scalise was nearly killed.
Yeah, they got upset. They said these are stringent laws, but see, in Heller, it was overturned by the United States Supreme Court. They did what the Congress should have done themselves. Now, when they had something in Alexandria, they still got strict gun laws, and they're complaining about the laws over which they have control. So
yes, exactly, because the D.C. law, even though they were not in D.C. when the dirtbag attacked Scalise and the others that were wounded, they had to go into the district to go to work after that ball game early in the morning, and that meant that unless they were unusual people indeed, they were not going to go back home and drop off the gun that they might have been carrying, because they legally could have been carrying in Alexandria, but nobody was, of course, and that's why the district law actually stymied people from exercising their Second Amendment right even outside the district. Right,
and the thing that bothered me is certain congressmen wanted to exempt themselves and allow themselves to carry in D.C., but didn't speak to the other people, and that's what bothers me.
Oh,
you can't have special privileges.
It was a classic case. Even while at the same time there's been a bill in the Congress since the opening bell in January saying that anybody in the country with a concealed carry permit from any jurisdiction should be able, and would be under this law, able to carry a concealed carry firearm in any jurisdiction. They don't need anything just for congressmen, but you are so right. Their default position is, well, let's take care of me.
Well, one congressman, a good man, I think, Thomas Massey, a Kentucky congressman, has introduced a bill allowing anyone who has concealed carry permit in the state to carry in D.C. He explained, after the horrific shooting in the Republican congressional baseball practice, there will be likely calls for special privileges to protect politicians. Our reaction should instead be to protect the right of all citizens guaranteed in the Constitution, the right to self-defense. I do not want to extend a special privilege to politicians because the right to keep and bear arms is not a privilege. It's a God-given right protected by our Constitution. And he quoted Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Congress has the authority to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district as may become the seat of government of the United States. So basically, if Congress isn't doing their job and they can't protect us, it has to go to the United States Supreme Court to get the gun laws declared unconstitutional in Heller, and then they complained about the gun laws in the district when the shooting occurred, and they wanted to carry guns in their district but not allow anyone else. Something is wrong with the way we're vetting our politicians on the right to keep and bear arms. And I appreciate your organization because it's down to earth. It understands the problem. It's not always the people up there that are going to protect your gun rights.
Well, and here's the one of the obstacles, I think, for some of the groups. It's not enough, in our opinion, to say that somebody has turned in a perfect questionnaire, and they may well have, but there's got to be more to what happens. You got to look at more to what's going to happen in Congress, and that's a question of attitude. Now, we're coming into a break, but we can pick up and discuss attitude a little bit, because by the grace of God, sir, you've got a bunch of it, and that's why we like roymore.org. That's the place you go if you want to help out in that Senate campaign that Judge Roy Moore is running right now in Alabama. We're going to be back and talk some more just in a minute.
Owners News Hour, exploring a wide range of Second Amendment issues. Here's your host, Larry Pratt.
It's my pleasure to be interviewing Judge Roy Moore. Has been on the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama and is now a candidate for the U.S. Senate in that state. And according to the polls, he's doing pretty well. And that may be Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader's worst nightmare. He's got 2 or 3 senators that he has trouble corralling. And who knows? I can hope that Judge Moore might be the critical mass in getting the Senate to finally take seriously its oath of office and to vote consistently with the Constitution, something that seems to be a problem for a lot of senators to do. Good men and women, and they, on many issues, I think, are probably down the line conservative. But when it comes to standing up to what the leadership wants, to what the establishment wants, then knees get wobbly. And Judge Moore, we've seen you over the years. There's one thing I think everybody would agree: you don't have wobbly knees.
Well, thank you, Larry. I believe in standing on the Constitution, and an understanding of it helps a lot. Our first most invaluable right in the Constitution is the right to acknowledge God. It was this God which led to our founding fathers to recognize the right of self-defense in the law historically. That right comes from God, and it is a right to protect yourself. Now, many people are being led to believe in the public, and I understand this, that guns kill people. Well, sure, guns kill people, cars kill people, knives kill people, but you can't restrict your right to drive a car because somebody's going to run into a crowd in Boston and Louisiana and France and wherever in our country. France isn't, of course, in our country, but anywhere, you
Exactly.
don't turn around and say, well, we can't drive cars. Well, the same is true with guns. Guns don't kill people in themselves. It's the people behind the gun. It's the morality that we've got to address, and that goes back to recognizing our right to acknowledge God. And if we don't do that, then, of course, we can't solve the problem by government coming in and restricting guns. That's not the solution. That's the problem. Government takes over areas where it's not involved. It usurps rights under our Bill of Rights and does so with, say, ammunition. You've got to watch not only the guns, you got to watch restrictions on ammunition. A gun can't be any good without ammunition.
Well, that's right, and they'll go at us anywhere they can, or you can't be in this particular place. We'll have a no-gun zone. Or they've got lots of ways they've been thinking about doing this. But the underlying issue seems to me that separates you from so many others, not only in your campaign, but elsewhere that will be your colleagues, hopefully, in the United States Senate, is that you look at law as something other than just what some judge or several judges might have said, that judges can be wrong, just like politicians can be wrong.
That's true.
And what we hear people saying is, well, if the Supreme Court has spoken, that's the last word. And I've seen from what you have said and ruled, you don't buy that. You buy the notion that, as you've just said, the Constitution is the supreme law. And if the court gets it wrong, well, we're going to have to try to fix it.
The problem is, Larry, we've got this judicial supremacy concept where judges have put themselves, especially at the Supreme Court, above the law they're sworn to uphold. And when they ruled in Obergefell, for example, many attorney generals, my opponent being one, came out and said, well, that's the supreme law of the land. Well, judges don't make law. And you've got to go to the Constitution to find out what the supreme law of the land is. And it's specifically stated it's this Constitution and the laws of the United States made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or the laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding, which simply means that state judges are sworn, just like federal judges, to the supreme law of the land. And if you have a Supreme Court that departs from interpretation of law and begins making up rights, those rights will eventually usurp those contained in the Bill of Rights. And that's the process that's going on. And when they do that, someday they'll have the right of privacy and not to be interfered with and come against guns. It's like that's the problem. So
what we're talking about right now, I'm afraid, is that all too often when the Supreme Court sits, when they're in session, that means that a constitutional convention de facto is in session, and that's just got to stop.
Well, Larry, I've written a book. It's out on Amazon. It's a very cheap book. I don't get any money from it. Basically, I buy my copies cheaper, but it's a few dollars. It's called "Abuse of Power" by the United States Supreme Court's gay marriage decision, and it discusses these things. It discusses why judges can't rule above the law, that it's illegal, that it's and I quote 5 chief justices and 5 United States associate justice, or 5 presidents rather, and something like 23 cases of the United States Supreme Court. I quote numerous documents to show that judges are simply not law; they interpret law, and if we forget that, then we wind up in problems.
I think that's exactly where we've been, and of course, too many elected officials are all too happy to play that game, because if they want to go in the direction of, say, gun control, and they have a case that has ruled against the Second Amendment, they'll try getting away with this little act. Say, well, the court has ruled, the Supreme Court, that's the law of the land, and what else can we do? Well,
you interpreted it just right, properly. You said that they then become the amendment process and amend the Constitution by judicial fiat. And this has got to stop. And believe me, if they take away the giver of our rights, they'll take away the Second Amendment. And basically, it's tied. I quoted in Heller and in McDonald versus Chicago, the right that our fathers found came from God, and we've got to recognize those rights.
It seems to me that is the lodestone. That is the fundamental principle that judges should be evaluated on. If they can't agree to what you've just said, they really don't belong on any bench that's going to be ruling on any case coming up from an inferior court.
And the Senate has a lot to do with that, Larry, because they're the ones that remove people who are impeached by the House. And if judges simply get one impeached on the United States Supreme Court, you'd see your whole process change, and that people would start adhering to the Constitution and obeying the laws of the land and stop trying to make it up as they go for political correctness and political efficiency or political practicality.
Now, when you start talking about impeaching judges, that's really going to get this establishment. I don't think they could be any more against you. But
well, they're against that because they put the power in the judges. And when you do that, Washington said that, well, I hear your music, so I'll stop on that one.
Well, we'll pick up with a representative of your campaign, and we'll take a look at how it's going. After that, we thank you so much for the time that you've given us right now, and we're just looking forward to seeing you in Washington, where I think you're going to make a big difference just because you have a backbone, and we're looking forward to that. Take care, sir.
Thank you, sir.